Actor Movie Spotlight, William Shatner. Welcome to a new series where I spotlight one of my favorite actors and look at some of my favorite of their movies. This week, William Shatner. How can anyone not love the mighty Shat? The one and only Captain Kirk. Fuck that Chris Wooden actor guy. Pine, Wooden, get eat? No? Fuck off then. And one of those actors whose presence in a film practically guarantees a good time and always makes me smile. Obviously, the Shat is most famous as the greatest and most iconic of all the Star Trek captains, but what about the Star Trek movies? Well, to be honest, I have the original Star Trek the motion picture on Blu-ray but have yet to get around to watching it. I swear I will. I vaguely recall watching it, or at least being in the room while it was on the telly, when I was a kid and thinking it was boring as fuck, but a kid's perspective is not necessarily the right one, especially when it comes to more cerebral sorts of things, so I am intrigued to see whether I like it more now or still think it's boring as fuck. We'll see. The rest of the Trek movies with the Shat, however, I have seen, and not too long ago. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is always fated as being the best of the Trek movies, which I think is a little overrating it myself, but that's not to say that I don't like it or anything. It's always entertaining and enjoyable. Those mind-controlling slug things that they put in Chekhov's ears are just so gross and disgusting, and the mighty Shat is on spectacular scenery-eating form. Kararan. Nothing more needs to be said than that. That Pratt trying to copy him in that dreadful recent Into Darkness movie just served to provide solid and final proof that there is, in fact, only the one Shat. Star Trek III: The Search for Spock is rather less loved than Khan, but to be perfectly honest, I've always liked it pretty much the same amount. It's a fun and entertaining romp with some nice scenes, particularly with the Enterprise crew telling Starfleet to go fuck themselves and stealing their ship and sodding off on a 1,000,000,000 chance mission of somehow bringing Leonard Nimoy back to life. The Shat has some great scenes too, such as when he learns of his son's murder, goes all un-PC by roaring Klingon bastards and finally kicks the Klingon Doc Brown off a cliff to his death with a mighty yell of "I have had enough of you." Fucking class. Next up is Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, which is the most successful of all the original Trek movies with non-geeks. This has made some of the nerdier misery guts crowd turn their nose up at it, particularly of late, but yeah, this is one of my two favorites of the series as Kirk and company fuck off to 1980s San Francisco for some strange reason or another and get involved in all manner of jolly japes. The Shat is fantastic in this, being incredibly charming and likable, warm and funny throughout. To all those who don't like this wonderful, fun and most accessible of Star Trek movies, all I can say is, double damas on you. Then we come to Star Trek V: The Search for God or some such shit. This is the only one of the original films I couldn't be bothered to buy the Blu-ray of because, even though the mighty Shat directed it, it's still shit. There's some funny bits, which the fanboys hate, though I always laughed my ass off at Scotty knocking himself out on the beam. But this is pretty bad shit, man. Finally there's Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, which is the last full original crew movie and a great way to go out on. This is my second favorite of the series, a great sci-fi conspiracy thriller, and the Shat is just so great in this. I can practically quote the trailer for this word by word. Let them die. Racism has never been so much fun as with the Shat. Now I know the Shat's in another one, that Generations thing, but as great as he is in it, blowing Patrick Stewart off the screen just by virtue of having a personality, it's not that good of a movie, and I just can't bear to watch the real Kirk Carkit for no apparent reason other than shit-writers trying to hand the franchise over to lesser talents. Yeah, I'm sorry folks, I'm not really that much of a Trek fan. I quite liked DS9 back in the day, though much of it's pretty boring nowadays, but when it comes to the movies it's all about the Shat for me. That's it for the Star Trek films, but the Shat has some other gems in his cinematic repertoire, the greatest of which is probably the 1977 horror flick Kingdom of the Spiders. In this rather wonderful underrated gem, which I only stumbled on last year because he was in it, the Shat is a swaggering country vet who starts having a very bad day, along with everyone else in his town, when he finds pesticides have wiped out the natural food source of killer spiders and they decide to turn their attention to human flesh instead. As you do. Kingdom of the Spiders is an absolute hoot from start to finish and was actually way better than I was expecting for such a cheesy sounding premise in a 70s flick. It was made of awesome and huge props to the Shat, not only for being his usual fantastic, larger-than-life self, but also for that gross-ass scene where he's covered in spiders, yeah, real spiders, no fucking CGI shit, that proceed to crawl all over him and even has one stuck to his fucking face at one point. Now that's some serious badass shit right there. The Shat also makes an appearance in the early 80s slasher horror flick Visiting Hours, in which a decidedly psychotic Michael Ironside decides to make an example of feminist TV journalist Lee Grant. The Shat is Grant's friendly and supportive producer who sadly does not get to kick Ironside's ass in the climax, which is really what I was hoping for. That slight disappointment aside, Visiting Hours is actually a pretty solid little thriller that's well worth a look. And not just for the Shat, with another point of interest being Linda Pearl as a friendly nurse who becomes another target for nutty old Mike, and she is as hot as fuck in this movie. Get the DVD or stream it or whatever you crazy kids do these days, 'cause it's well worth it. Another top Shat flick is a more recent effort, 2015's anthology horror flick A Christmas Horror Story. The Shat is on top form as the guy who links all the stories in this flick together, a cheerful radio DJ who finds it hard to keep up the Christmas cheer as the film goes on and his peaceful little town starts disintegrating into major weirdness around him. The Shat is pretty much the only guy on screen in his scenes, but pitches his performance absolutely perfect, and the individual stories are also pretty great, especially the one with Santa Claus going all action hero when his elves turn into zombies. No, really. To cut a long story short and all kidding aside, I love William Shatner and his presence on screen is always welcome in my house. If anyone can recommend any other slices of delicious Shat cheese, or you just want to talk about them, please feel free to do so. As a screen favorite, the Shat gets an A+ from me.